Before we start this episode, I'd just like to acknowledge the Yidinji people on whose land this podcast is recorded, as well as the other 70 traditional owner groups whose sea country makes up the Great Barrier Reef, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Hello, and welcome to Word on the Reef, a podcast where we take the plunge into one of the world's most spectacular natural wonders, the Great Barrier Reef. Today, we're going to continue our countdown of the top 8 fantastic beasts of the Great Barrier Reef and where to find them. Our guest is Tahn Miller, a master reef guide with Wavelength Reef Cruises. He's spent over a decade in the water helping people have incredible encounters with magical reef creatures. This is part 2 of an interview which started back in episode 13. So if you haven't already, I highly recommend you go back and listen to that episode first. Also, I just want to acknowledge that during this so-called countdown interview, I accidentally counted upwards instead of downwards. So the top animal, which I will reveal last, is going to be at number 8. But that's not important. The important part is that this is a really fun discussion about amazing marine encounters. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Hello, Tahn. How are you?
G'day, Tanya.
Let's move on to animal number 3 on our top 8 list, and that is the sea turtle.
Wow, everyone's favourite. Everybody wants to see a turtle when they come to the reef, don't they?
So any listeners who want to listen to a full episode going in depth about turtles, feel free to go back to episode 8. I interviewed Richard Fitzpatrick and
yes.
Yeah, we talked very extensively about turtles from a conservation point of view, but from a visitor's point of view, what's the best way to find a sea turtle? Where do they typically hang out, and how can you look for them when you're snorkeling?
Well, I got to do a big shout out to our local resident sea turtle, Scratchy, on Opal Reef. She is a good old-fashioned girl and shows up every time, nearly every time. We call her Scratchy because she loves to rub her shell on things, especially the soft coral. You know, soft coral release this chemical in the water, terpenes, and it repels other corals and it lets them dominate areas. But I think that this stuff actually helps them. Ooh. And of course, turtles' plates pop off when they grow. And so they've got to rub against. And of course, some of them are pretty buoyant, these turtles, so they might need to wedge themselves under something. And there's 4 different places that I'll check to see if she's sitting or sleeping. And we have about a 30 to 40% hit rate that she'd be there. Mm-hmm. So local knowledge, the outer reef, the inner reef's islands. You know, if I wanted to see a turtle, if my life dream was to see a turtle and I wanted 100% guarantee, I would be booking a ticket to Heron Island.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had a magical experience down there. Like, I had my Master Reef Guide cohort field school there 3-4 years ago. And Heron Island, just like Lady Elliot Island, are these mythical places that you hear about.
Yeah.
And I think I'd been in the water 15 minutes. I'd swum the channel. I'd seen over 50 rays, 100 turtles, and that wasn't even in nesting time. 100 turtles I'd seen of 3 different species. I'd seen a dozen sharks. I'd seen 25 manta rays and a humpback whale.
What?
And I came back electrified. Like a good day for me. I think my best day of turtles was at a place called Chinaman's Reef off the Daintree. And it was a 16 in 1 hour snorkel. So that was a record for me. But to see 100 that are just straight chilling is crazy.
Some people say the reason that they act so chilled out is because of the toxins in the jellyfish that they eat, but I think that might be a myth.
The myth that I like is the turtle weed chills them right out.
The turtle weed?
The turtle weed.
Oh, yeah, that's because they obviously
the green macroalgae.
Yeah. My go-to, if I want to find turtles for people, is to look for the turtle weed and different types of algae and seaweed that grows on the seafloor. So if you find an area where there's a patch of dead coral and a lot of seaweed and algae grows there, the turtles will go there and eat the seaweed. So looking around in areas of seaweed is where you'll find the turtles eating. But turtles also breathe air, so they come up to the surface fairly frequently. I mean, apparently they can hold their breath for hours if they need to. They can slow their heart rate down to about 9 minutes in between heartbeats to conserve oxygen. That's apparently. What they say. But if they're active, moving around, looking for food, they come up a fair bit more often than that. So that means You don't need to dive down deep to see a turtle. You can just be snorkeling on the surface and one might pop up right in front of you. And that also means you can see them when you're just standing on the boat or standing on the beach. So if you're standing on the boat and looking out at the water, just keep your eyes peeled because you might see turtles popping up to the surface to take a breath. And if you do, just give a shout out to your friends that are in the water, because a lot of the time people are snorkeling around with their tunnel vision looking straight down, and they'll swim straight past a turtle that's right next to them on the surface and they won't even see it. So everyone on the boat will be shouting and pointing to let them know that there's a turtle there.
That's right. What we see, I'm sure you can vouch for this, is when you arrive at a reef on a boat, they'll pop up and they'll go, what's that noise? And they'll put their head up and they'll look at the boat and they'll go, oops, and then shoot straight back down. But there's definitely a way to interact with turtles. If you swim at it, like get super excited, you swim at it and go, I love you, I want to hug you and touch you, which we don't do, they freak out. But I always say to people, if you slow down, if their first vision of you is just like super chilled, the encounter can last for an hour.
Yeah, just like any animal, really. If you go splashing towards it, making lots of noise and sudden movements, if they feel threatened by you, they'll take off way faster.
You wouldn't be able to catch them.
You'll never be able to catch it. But if you just swim over calmly, give it plenty of space, don't touch it, don't block its access to the surface, and just act really calm and chilled out, turtle won't see you as a predator, and you'll be able to spend, like Tahn said, an hour just swimming with it, taking photos.
There was one turtle that we named Connie on Agincourt number 1, and she was very famous for being aggressive and actually taking the fight to you. She had a record of biting many a snorkeler.
Oh, geez.
Which can be pretty painful if you're just wearing Lycra.
Yeah, they all do have their own personalities and life experiences. They can live at least 80 years, so they will remember if they've had a bad experience, I think, and act accordingly. So yes, treat every turtle with respect and it will not see you as a threat. What sort of turtles do you see the most at the reef?
They say that out of the 7 species of turtle on the planet, 6 of those live on the Great Barrier Reef. But I would say in our part of the world, you're most likely to see a green turtle, a hawksbill turtle, which is actually the most endangered turtle, and probably the loggerhead, which is a little bit less likely.
Yeah, so the green sea turtle is the one we definitely see the most, and the name is a bit misleading because it doesn't look green. It looks like a mottled brown colour, which helps it blend in with the sea floor. So do keep your eyes peeled when you're looking down, because it could just look like a coral or a rock until it moves, and then you'll realise that it's a turtle. But you kind of get your eye in when you've been doing this for a long time, which is why going with an experienced guide can increase your chances of seeing one. And although the green sea turtle can grow over 1 metre long, we often see them quite young, so they might only be, between 1 and 2 feet long a lot of the time. The hawksbill turtle has, as the name suggests, more of a pointed beak than the green turtle, which has sort of a more rounded face. And the loggerhead, when they're grown, as the name suggests, they are chunky turtles with big heads. And they're quite rare to see. I've only seen them about 3 times in my 12 plus years of diving, and all 3 times was down in Heron Island and Lady Elliot Island. But, it's a tough life being a turtle as well, because they really have a lot of hurdles to jump over or hoops to swim through, even just to reach adulthood, don't they?
That's right. They it's commonly known that out of every 1,000 turtles that hatch, there's only 1 that survives. So it's 1 out of 1,000. So for every 1 turtle that you see and you have an amazing encounter with, there's 999 turtles that have had to die. And I believe the number is higher now because of the rising sea levels, 3 millimeters a year. But yeah, it's special. And I always try to impress that upon people. And not only that, is when a turtle hatches, it has to go down through what we call the danger zone. Crabs, birds that nest on the same place that the eggs have hatched. So their young can feast on baby turtles. They get out into the ocean, there's predator fish, sharks. If they get through this danger zone, then they have the whole Pacific Ocean to contend with. And previously, there wasn't technology that existed to have, small enough tags to understand the movements of sea turtles. And it's not an exact science, but there's definitely indicators to suggest that some turtles will circumnavigate the Pacific, go all the way back around, and come back to the Australian continent via New Zealand in some cases. up the coastline with the trade winds, find the Great Barrier Reef, and then find somewhere that they're comfortable with and live out their lives. A male, once it finds a place that it's happy with, will just stay there and it just eat mates and sleeps, where the females, they do the heavy lifting of the species. And female turtles don't necessarily sexually mature until they're about 30, 35, I believe is the age. So that's a lot of traveling that they do before they start to mate. And we believe that a female turtle will try and mate with as many males as possible. She possibly can every year. She stores that semen in a little pouch in her body, and she draws upon that when she needs it. So she'll go nest, lay a clutch of 100, maybe 150 eggs. She'll go back out to sea and refertilize, go back up. So it's a repetitive process. Highly energy consuming and very dangerous for the female turtles. But they do it every year. And it's between 5 to 7 clutches of eggs I think they can produce over a nesting season. And the hawksbill turtles, they don't do it every year. That's why they're more endangered. They will only nest every 2 to 3 years. So because of their beautiful plates on their shell, they are highly sought after, historically for the trinket trade.
Yeah, I mean, tortoise shell is a pattern that you see on like sunglasses and hair combs and stuff. And nowadays, the tortoise shell pattern is made of plastic. But back in the day, it was actual turtle shell for making combs and,
there's a lot of challenges with the hawksbill population because we now know they actually migrate north up into PNG and parts of Indo to nest. So that's out of our realm of protection. I know the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park has a pretty awesome strategy to protect sea turtles, especially in nesting grounds. But, we can only do that in Australian waters where our government has the mandate.
Absolutely. So when you think about all those challenges, they don't lay eggs until they're at least 30. They face all those challenges and the amount of energy it takes for them to just survive all that time and go to lay their eggs. And then only 1 in 1,000 eggs actually survive. So I feel so lucky that we can just go and dive with turtles almost every day, because with the challenges they're facing now, we definitely can't get complacent and think that they're always going to be that numerous, because they are endangered.
One of the biggest threats to turtles is not only climate change, but habitat destruction. With the reduction of seagrass meadows, less food means lowering of population, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. We just had Cyclone Jasper off the coast of Cairns in December 2023, and the biggest recorded floods in Cairns history, and that caused a lot of damage to seagrass beds apparently. And when you go out as a tourist, you're typically going to look on the coral reef a bit further out, so you might not see or realise that the seagrass beds have been impacted, and that will eventually have a flow-on effect to turtles. So they're facing a lot, the sea turtles, but luckily we still can see them every day while we're out there snorkeling and diving. But I think we're ready to move on. So let's move on to number 4 on our list of top animals to see on the reef, which is the Maori or humphead wrasse.
Maori wrasse, or Maori wrasse, we say in our Australian tongue.
Yeah.
The Napoleon wrasse, they say in Egypt, I believe. Yeah, I guess when you come to Cairns or you go through Airlie Beach, that Proserpine Airport, or even down at Gladstone, you're always going to see signage, perhaps in Brisbane as well, of this big blue fish with a face with big lips, couple of teeth, mostly cross-eyed, big black eyes, beady eyes. And for a lot of the time, it's people's first sort of hint that they're in an area where they might be going to go to the Great Barrier Reef. And I think the first famous one was called Wally, I believe. And the Wally's had been a lot of fish.
A lot of reincarnations.
Yeah, a lot of
Wally.
I think I've had Wally, Gus, Chunk. There's a couple of they get pretty trusting, and for a long time people would feed the fish anything and everything. Before the industry got itself together and stop fish feeding only under permit with certain pellets or whatever, but they get quite trusting. I mean, you would have had heaps of experiences with Maori wrasse. Tell me about one of yours.
Yeah, so at Moore Reef in Cairns is a really good place to see Wally. I know there's been Maori wrasse that have been famous in the dive and snorkel industry for decades now, and a lot of the time after one moves on, the next one just gets called Wally again because he's so famous. So whenever the tourists come, they're like, we want to see Wally. So chances are that you will be able to see a Maori wrasse, and it's a good chance that it might be called Wally. And yeah, Wally's really friendly. It's one of 800 species of wrasse in the ocean, but it's really huge. It can grow up to 2 meters long and weigh up to 180 kilograms, can live more than 30 years. They're territorial, so you usually have one main male living on a reef, and that's the one that will become quite accustomed to snorkelers, and you might find it coming up to snorkelers. And so it's actually really easy to see it up close and get a photo with it, which is why it's so famous in all the billboards and kind of like a poster child fish for the reef. And despite his huge size, he's not dangerous, pretty much only eats crustaceans. So he's not a threat as long as you don't touch him or poke him or threaten him in any way. And the Maori wrasse is another species which changes its sex during its life cycle. It starts female and can become a male as it matures.
That's right. The smaller Maori wrasse are a greeny colour, and that indicates that they're a female. And I'm pretty sure that at around 10 or 15 years, or whether it's just ones needed in that particular area, that they'll change into that sort of electric blue colour and then continue to their full length and age. But they've had a pretty hard life. They're on the endangered and protected species list because the curse of the Maori wrasse being so trusting and friendly also coincides with the fact that I don't eat fish, but fishermen tell me that that is probably one of the most delicious tasting fishes on the Great Barrier Reef. So this is really troubling. So it's been a sought after fish in places where I live in Port Douglas. You know, it was very common for tourists to come to Port Douglas, go to the reef, then get fish and chips. And what you would get that would be really exotic that you couldn't get anywhere else was wrasse and chips.
Oh, no.
Luckily now there are very, very strict guidelines and rules. First of all, the Great Barrier Reef is zoned for multiple uses. Everyone knows about green zones. We've got blue zones, light and dark blue, conservation parks, yellow zones.
Yep.
So it's all multi-use park. And we know that so many different types of creeds of people use this place, but we also know that the value of these species is just immense and they'd be very easily disappeared. And we've seen a reduction in numbers. So even if someone was to accidentally catch a Maori wrasse on a lure or a piece of dead bait, if they were to lift it out of the water and say, hey, look, I've caught this blue fish, that's a criminal offence.
Wow.
So you have to release that as humanely as possible. And a lot of people don't know this. You scroll Instagram and you see fishermen holding Maori wrasse and, the compliance team at the marine park see that, they're going to investigate. So I would recommend that if anyone catches one to just in the water, take the lure out and send it on its merry way. And I think the protection's been like that for over 15, 16, 17, maybe 18 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, but super cool species. And one of those encounters that you can have in the ocean, it leaves an impression on you. And people walk away going, wow, because they're taken away with the size of these and the colouring and just how gentle they are. And think, we need to protect those. And that's important.
Yeah, I know from a scientific perspective, we're probably not supposed to get too emotionally attached to our fish friends, but I really love Wally. And I just feel so sad if I were to think about poor old Wally ending up as fish and chips. So yeah. I guess snorkeling on the reef is a really good way to see that fish are not dumb animals. They're pretty smart. They're really friendly, or can be, be really intelligent creatures. So it's an important lesson that you can learn from swimming with Wally. Just quickly want to talk about his many names that he has from around the world. Why does he have these names?
Well, I think in Egypt, in the Red Sea, when Napoleon had his obsession with Egypt, they were fishing. There was people eating fish over there. And I think the hump on the humphead wrasse, it looked like Napoleon with his hat. That's how the story goes. But the name of the Maori wrasse locally is that the patterns on the sides of its face to the first people that were coming up and down the GBR was that it looked like the Maori muku, which is a series of traditional face tattooing art pieces, I think. They got lots of deeper meanings for Māori people, but there's definitely a resemblance there. So people called it how they seen it.
All right, so that's the Maori wrasse. So number 5 on our list is the potato cod, which is one of a few types of giant cod and groper that we can see on the Great Barrier Reef. If you've seen a picture of one or dived with one, they're pretty huge. They can grow up to 1 metre in length, weigh up to 100 kilos, and they can live quite a long time, up to, we think, about 40 years of age. They got their name because they've got this mottled colouring, and they are quite friendly and bold. They will come up to divers, making them a favourite subject for underwater photography and, really important for tourism. So where on the reef would you recommend people go if they're interested in swimming with this giant charismatic fish, the potato cod?
There are places along the Great Barrier Reef that you can encounter them on paying tours. Off the day boats, I believe Silversonic and Poseidon goes to a place called Castle Rock, and people have been diving with Colin, I believe his name is.
Colin the cod, how appropriate.
Colin the cod, and it was there when I got there 15 years ago, and they said it was there the 10 years before that. Like, these fish are old living fish. Quite easily fished out because they're sort of trophy fish, but you get them in a one spot and they're territorial. They're big, they're sort of the behemoths of the coral reef, and they're really the apex predators, and they are smart. There's another one that's up at the Cod Hole, and I think Mike Ball's Spirit of Freedom on their far north trips up by Lizard Island there, they visit the place where you can have a pretty cool interaction with the cods. And, a lot of people come out to the reef and worry about sharks, right? But sharks are totally not the problem. And not saying the cods are, but the cods are more the apex predators. They're the top dogs of the reef. They can quite easily bite a shark in half without even chewing.
But they're not going after humans, are they?
No, they're definitely not. I've seen the smaller cods accidentally bite a diver's hand before, but that was because that diver had food in their pocket, which is heavily frowned upon. The only feeding that can happen on the reef is under permit. So these fish, they have learnt traits, behaviour patterns in the humans. Like, they watch us. And that movement was a food signal to them. And so this one went for it. This actually particular small one was called Aggro. And you know who you are if you're listening, who got bitten. But the most impressive thing about the gropers is the Queensland groper. And if anyone has ever had the pleasure, the occasion to see a Queensland groper in the wild, in its habitat, it is a sight to be seen. Like, there's a big groper that lives around the pontoon on Agincourt number 3. That's sort of, it's not tame, but it capitalizes on the fish feeding that happens at the pontoon. And I've seen a couple of smaller ones. We have a resident at Opal Reef, but I've had the occasion to see one fully grown Queensland groper when I was drift diving, an inward drift dive from the drop-off into one of the reefs. And it was leading a parade of 25 to 30 grey reef whaler sharks. The visibility on that day was 60 metres plus, which for the Great Barrier Reef is pretty awesome because we enjoy about 15 to 30 metres on average of visibility on the outer reef. But this day it was just amazing. I had 8 certified divers. We're at about 18 metres deep. We're drifting in, and around the reef, I could see what looked like a school of fish coming at me. Not fast, just pretty slow. But as it got closer, I'd seen that these fish were getting bigger, and I noticed that it was a cod and a parade of sharks, like a brigade of sharks.
Oh my goodness.
And they were following the groper. And they weren't following the groper because they wanted to attack the groper. They were going to scavenge off whatever the groper was planning to eat. And so I had 8 certified divers. So I pulled them into a big crack or crevice into the sloping reef, and we watched these animals swim past, and the size of this Queensland groper was easily over 2 meters, and they look as round, perhaps more round, as like a 44-gallon drum. Like, they are huge. When they crack their tail, it is like a tree is snapped in half. It is actually incredible to see, and then to watch all the sharks swim past. And then I looked at all my divers, which were neutrally buoyant at about 16, 17 meters in this crack or crevice in a ravine in the reef, and their eyeballs were as wide as a full moon. Like, it's once in a lifetime thing. Like, it's just unbelievable. So you see them in the ocean, they look like submarines, and they're the ones that, the sharks just would not mess with. No way.
Wow, that sounds like a really amazing encounter with a Queensland groper. And so have they ever been recorded having a go at humans?
Look, you hear these stories about them next to tenders and grabbing children type of thing, but I don't think there's any credibility to that. I bet you there's people that have got their hands bitten trying to feed them. It's pretty common practice in far north Queensland or throughout the 80s and 90s to feed gropers from the docks, and it used to be pretty popular to go see the feeding of George the Groper in Port Douglas, but that establishment got pulled down some years ago. I believe the last groper feed from shore is up at Cooktown from the public open wharf there. But one other really cool behavioural thing that I've seen with the Queensland gropers is one time I had to jump off the boat, and what I seen was a Queensland groper off the bow just looking at the boat. And it didn't see me, and it was watching what the boat was doing. So they're very smart. Very, very smart. And it seen me and then freaked and went, big crack of the tail, big crunch, and then it was gone like a torpedo.
Wow. So, yeah, I think the key takeaway is with any animals that you see in the ocean, whether it's a giant Queensland groper or a potato cod or a shark or whatever, as long as we're minding our own business, they're not interested in us. It's when they learn that they're going to get food from somewhere that they might come over and investigate. So, as always, the best way to stay safe when you're diving and snorkeling is just don't touch anything, don't harass any of the animals, and don't feed them.
Yeah, I think, just as a good takeaway is to just treat it like an art gallery or a museum. We just there to observe. We live in this unique time where humans have the ability not only to just swim freely in the ocean, but to go under and immerse ourselves. So the animals haven't caught up. They're only starting to recognize us, some of the more intelligent species, but a lot of them don't know how to interact with us. So we always just got to treat it with a high level of respect.
That's all we have time for in today's episode, but make sure you hit subscribe because we will be counting down the rest of the top 8 animals to see at the Great Barrier Reef and where to find them very soon. And if you thought today's animals were amazing, you haven't heard anything yet. If you'd like to help protect these incredible animals, I'm going to put a link in the episode description to a petition you can sign, asking the Australian government to implement stronger climate policies, among other measures to help protect the Great Barrier Reef. So please check it out and sign it. It only takes about 20 seconds. If you'd like to help sponsor this podcast, please consider becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month over at patreon.com/wordonthereefpodcast. You'll get a shout out and the proceeds will help to cover costs like podcast hosting, editing software, and so on, to ensure that this podcast can continue to raise awareness about the reef for a long time into the future. You can also help by writing a review and sharing this podcast with a friend. And don't forget to follow Word on the Reef on Instagram. Make sure you follow Tahn Miller on Instagram as well. That's TAHN Miller. He has some amazing photos and videos up there of his adventures on the reef, so definitely give him a follow. That's all for now. Best fishes, and see you next time.